You people come in here thinking money changes who you are, Edward Langston said coldly, eyes fixed on the sharply dressed black man standing calmly at the VIP counter. But this is Sterling, not some corner check-cashing place. The room froze. It wasn't just what he said. It was how loudly he said it, and who he said it to. Malcolm Reed, 55, the billionaire founder of Peak Pulse Holdings, didn't blink. He set his briefcase gently on the counter and glanced around the marble-floored lobby. Patrons shifted uncomfortably in leather chairs. A woman in pearls looked up from her tablet, narrowed her eyes, then smirked. But Malcolm's voice was even, deliberate. You're making a mistake that will cost you more than you can calculate. And before we reveal exactly how Malcolm flipped the balance of power in under 10 minutes, let us know where you're watching from. New Orleans, Detroit. Maybe you've seen this kind of arrogance before. If Malcolm's story speaks to your sense of justice, subscribe now. Tomorrow, we share another fight where dignity wins. Now back to this one, where power wore a tailored suit, and ignorance mistook it for weakness. Malcolm had walked into Sterling Bank just after 11:00 a.m., greeted by the same perfumed air and polished granite that had once been used to keep men like him out. But not today. Today he arrived with purpose. The branch's walls gleamed with portraits of past presidents and board members, every one of them white, and most of them men. At the VIP desk, Edward Langston. 50 kept a stiff jaw as he read Malcolm's name off the withdrawal slip. Your account has been flagged for suspicious activity, Edward said, sliding the slip back without making eye contact. We can't honor this request. The woman in pearls, Clara Wentworth, a longtime client, leaned back on the leather chaise behind Malcolm and spoke just loudly enough to be heard. I don't know why they let just anyone use the private floor these days. Her voice oozed entitlement. Next thing you know, there'll be food trucks out front. Laughter floated up from a nearby group of patrons, none of whom looked Malcolm in the eye. Edward cleared his throat, pretending to be polite. I suggest you visit a more suitable branch. Malcolm studied him for a moment. Sterling will answer for this, he said quietly. Edward, annoyed, waved to a teller, Derek Holt, a man in his late 30s with a sarcastic edge and the type of grin that grew when no one was watching. Derek, Edward said, help our guest. Derek walked over slowly, exaggerated each step, and looked Malcolm up and down before offering a hollow smile. Do you need help reading the form, he asked? Sometimes the language confuses. Clients like yourself. Malcolm reached into his inner jacket pocket and retrieved his Sterling Elite black card. He handed it over. Derek took it, held it up toward the light like it might be counterfeit, then tapped a few keys. He muttered. System slow. Might take a while. Want to sit at the community desk? Clara chuckled. He probably thinks black card means something else, she said, pulling out her phone and taking a photo. For the record, she whispered to her feed. Sterling Bank is committed to class, not chaos. A few feet away, Sonia Blake, a 42-year-old financial analyst meeting a client in the adjacent booth, glanced up and began recording. Quietly, from under her folder. Meanwhile, Victor Hayes, a partner at a hedge fund, had just entered with his tablet in hand. He paused as he saw the commotion and began streaming to his private investors group. Elena Torres, seated near the reception desk, reviewing notes for an interview with a tech exec, hit record on her phone, eyes narrowing at Derek's tone. The insults continued. This withdrawal, Derek said, looks highly unusual. Are you sure it's not? He stopped. Fake laughed. You know what? Let me check with security. Lillian Baxter, director of VIP relations, appeared at the top of the glass staircase. Is there a problem, she asked? Voice tight. Edward beckoned her over. Malcolm turned. There's no problem. I've simply requested my funds. Lillian scanned him. then leaned over and whispered, "His profile doesn't meet Sterling's discretion standards." She didn't whisper softly enough. Sonia heard it. So did Victor. So did Malcolm. Lillian walked off briskly, but not before sending a message to the internal chat. Elena, curious, logged into the terminal on her lap. The notification read, "Suspicious client alert. Unknown profile attempting withdrawal. Escalate." A young client near the water station murmured, "That guy looks out of place." Malcolm stayed calm. "Every word of this," he said aloud, "is being preserved. Regina Cole." His trusted executive assistant, posing as a casual visitor, stood nearby, texting. Her message read, "Team in place, recording, footage secured, at that moment." Clara stood, adjusted her silk blouse, and called out, "Let's not pretend we all don't know what this is. This bank serves refined clientele, not whatever this is supposed to be." She raised her phone again. Hashtag standards matter. Derek, now visibly enjoying the show, slid Malcolm's ID back slowly. "This might take hours." "You sure you want to wait?" Malcolm didn't flinch. He pressed the tiny clasp on his left cufflink, activating a discreet recorder embedded inside. It blinked once. On? Clara's comments. Derek's slights. Lillian's whisper. All captured. Then, quietly, he turned to Regina and said, "Send it." Victor nodded from the corner and began uploading Sonia's footage to X with the tag hashtag Sterling Injustice. In the back room, Nathaniel Grant, an IT technician who had worked quietly with Malcolm for years, adjusted a lobby camera to center on Edward's smirk. He texted, "Your angle is ready." In less than 90 seconds, the video began to spread. It didn't need a caption, just Clara's voice, Derek's words, Lillian's tone, and Edward's cold refusal. Within 2 minutes, Victor's stream had been shared by 3 major finance influencers. Malcolm checked his watch. Then he turned back to Edward and said simply, "You have no idea what you've just set in motion." Edward laughed. "Is that a threat? No," Malcolm replied, pocketing his card. "It's a receipt." And as Edward looked around, confused by the gathering energy, the story was already leaving the building without him. This orchestrated affront was set to ignite a financial reckoning. The moment Edward Langston called security, the tone inside Sterling Bank shifted from smug to threatening, as if the institution were circling its wagons against a fabricated enemy. "Escort him out. He's triggering our fraud protocols." Edward barked into his mic, loud enough for every patron on the VIP floor to hear, as 2 guards in navy blazers moved toward Malcolm. Lillian Baxter, poised and venomous, leaned over a glass panel on the mezzanine and emailed every staff member on shift, "Urgent potential fraud risk, client name Malcolm Reed. Treat with extreme caution. Sonia Blake," seated just 2 tables away, caught the alert on her screen and glanced at Malcolm, then at Lillian, her expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief. "Where's your proof?" she asked, standing and approaching the counter. "Flagging a client publicly without cause is dangerous." Lillian's eyes narrowed, her smile condescending. "Know your place," she snapped, her voice carried. A nearby banker paused, exchanged glances with a security guard, then went back to pretending to be busy. Clara Wentworth, still clinging to her leather chaise like it was a throne, raised her phone again. "Sterling Bank doesn't entertain imposters," she announced, panning the camera dramatically across the lobby. "This is a place for legacy, not litigation." One of her followers commented instantly, "He doesn't belong there, period." Another replied, "Sterling stands for standards. He's just noise." Malcolm's gaze locked with Clara's, calm but defiant. "Falsehood," he said firmly. "Leaves a trail. And yours is unraveling." Security hesitated as Sonia's phone light blinked red. She was now streaming. Are you detaining him based on race or rumor? She asked Edward directly. He didn't answer. Instead, he motioned again to Derek Holt, who returned with a fake printout of a supposed security freeze. This shows your account is under review, Derek said, eyes gleaming. No funds for you today. Maybe try your luck downtown. He slid the forged notice across the counter like it was gospel. Malcolm picked it up, turned it over, saw the sterling watermark slightly misaligned, clearly faked. Falsifying records, he asked. You're doubling down. Lillian moved closer to Clara and whispered. He's a liability to the brand. Then brand him, Clara replied, waving her phone again. Let everyone see what happens when you try to cheat the system. She turned to the room and said louder. We'll be petitioning to have him banned from Sterling locations. A few VIP clients murmured in agreement, their tones hushed but affirming. One man in a navy vest whispered, We don't need this kind of noise in here. Another sipped from a sterling-rimmed espresso cup and muttered, Just embarrassing. Derek, emboldened, handed Malcolm a new slip marked, Account frozen, Client under review, and smirked. This could take weeks, maybe months. You understand? Right. I understand more than you think, Malcolm replied. This is recorded. He tapped his cufflink again for emphasis. Though it never stopped, Sonia stepped beside him. We have witnesses. I have audio, video, timestamps, all of it. Meanwhile, Elena Torres, still seated behind her sleek laptop, picked up on the sudden energy spike in her timeline. She leaned in as Sonia sent her the earlier clip of Edward telling Lillian, His kind tarnishes our brand. Elena's eyes widened. She immediately forwarded the clip to her editorial team with one word publishing, in the booth near the corner. Victor Hayes saw Elena's reaction and gave a quiet nod before re-uploading the feed with a new tag hashtag Sterling Injustice. Pat. 2. Caught in their own words. His followers surged past 5,000. Comments exploded. Racism in real time. Corporate profiling. Boycott Sterling. Meanwhile, Malcolm's phone buzzed quietly. It was Regina Sonia's stream is viral. You're trending just then. A woman in business casual near the entrance tapped her shoulder to her colleague and whispered, Is that Malcolm Reed from Peak Pulse? The man beside her raised an eyebrow. Why would he be here? They said he's a fraud. The woman looked again. No. He built Peak Pulse. That's him. The realization began to ripple quietly. Lillian glanced at her internal messages and frowned. Something's wrong, she said to Edward, who looked up at the crowd now forming near the VIP desk. He hissed. Phones away. Everyone. That's a privacy violation. But it was too late. Elena, now fully locked in, uploaded Sonia's audio clip, Edward's exact words. Time-stamped his kind tarnishes our brand in the clip. Lillian laughs. The file, titled Sterling Racism Internal Exposure, hit X within seconds. The post surged to 5 million views in under 4 minutes. Elena's caption read, This is what quiet power looks like, and what happens when it's disrespected. Patrons inside the bank saw the growing crowd outside. A woman near the elevator gasped, holding up her phone. It's live. They're broadcasting this right now. Edward turned pale. That's hacked footage, he shouted, pointing at Sonia's screen. That's illegal. But Victor's live stream showed the uncut scene. His audio captured Edward's own voice. The damage was done. A man in a tailored beige blazer near the teller line turned to his wife and whispered, We're moving our accounts. 2 others nodded. Derek saw the moment things changed, when the crowd no longer smirked. They stared, silent, watching, judging. Clara walked toward the back, frantically scrolling her phone. How is this possible, she muttered. He was nothing. Lillian stood frozen. She looked at Edward, her voice suddenly sharp. What did you say to him? What else did you say, Edward? Sweating now. Stared out the window. Malcolm slowly buttoned his jacket, eyes never leaving Edward's. This storm you unleashed, he said, was built on your arrogance. Now you'll weather the consequences. Just then, Nathaniel Grant, the quiet IT technician whose workstation sat above the vault corridor, texted Malcolm directly. Footage locked, network backup secure. Internal audio feed extracted. Malcolm typed back one word, send. And with that, a second wave of exposure prepared to erupt, one that would crack Sterling's polished facade wide open. This storm of exposure was poised to topple Sterling's facade. The moment security reached for Malcolm's arm, the bank crossed a line it couldn't uncross. "Get him out!" Edward Langston barked. His voice cracked with panic masked as control. "He's a fraud!" The two uniformed guards flanked Malcolm, their posture rehearsed and impersonal, as if expelling a black man in a suit was just another Tuesday at Sterling Bank. Clara Wentworth, radiant in cream silk and malice, stepped into the frame like she'd been waiting for this moment. "Finally," she said, flipping her phone to live stream. "Sterling Bank reaffirms its standards. No room for imposters." Then, with a flick of her wrist, she hurled her leather-bound notepad toward Malcolm's feet, the gesture so violent in contrast to her practiced elegance that it sent a shock through the room. The pad struck the floor, papers fanning out like contempt laid bare. "Wealth doesn't belong to you," she hissed. "It wears you like a bad costume." Lillian Baxter, still watching from the mezzanine, didn't flinch. Instead, she turned back to her desktop and, with 3 keystrokes, deleted Malcolm's pending transaction log. "You're erased," she muttered to herself with a satisfied smile, unaware that a second camera, repositioned by Nathaniel Grant from IT, was capturing every frame around them. Clients filmed the scene while others pretended not to notice, sipping espresso with trembling fingers. A few nodded. One man whispered, "This is what happens when they try to force their way into these spaces." But Malcolm, straightening his lapels, didn't resist the guards. He simply stared directly into Clara's lens and said, "Make sure you save that video. You'll want to remember this." The guards gripped his elbows and began walking him toward the exit. Derek Holt followed behind, enjoying the scene like a spectator at a play he helped direct. "You're nothing here," Derek called out. "Sterling has standards. You don't make the cut." Then, in a final act of cruelty, Edward Langston stepped behind the counter, retrieved Malcolm's account summary, printed earlier that morning, and fed it into the shredder with theatrical slowness. Officially gone, he announced. Clara clapped once. "Good riddance," someone muttered from the far end of the lobby. Lillian, still monitoring internal chat threads, posted one last message: client removed. Profile terminated. Outside, the glass doors glinted with sunlight, and a small news crew, tipped off by Victor Hayes' viral stream, began setting up cameras. Malcolm was escorted down the marble steps into the public view, the same way Sterling had always handled its undesirables, out the front, in full display, so everyone inside could breathe a little easier. But the world outside had changed in the last 10 minutes. Victor's live stream had jumped to 9,000 viewers. Sonia's footage had been re-uploaded to major platforms by Elena Torres, now standing near the camera crew, microphone in hand, watching the bank like a hawk. As the guards released Malcolm on the sidewalk, he calmly bent down, gathered the scattered notepad Clara had thrown, then handed it to a passing reporter. "You'll want this," he said. "It belongs in the story. Inside." Edward closed the blinds, his hands shaking. "Cut the network," he snapped. "Lock down all internal terminals. If any of this footage leaks, it's already everywhere." One intern whispered, "Too late." Malcolm stood quietly by a planter outside, pulled out a slim black USB drive from his jacket pocket, and turned to Regina Cole, who emerged from the crowd as if summoned. "Give this to Elena," he said. "It's time." Regina nodded, but before she could move, Derek appeared at the door again, smug. "Looking for this?" he asked. Holding up the USB, he kicked it across the sidewalk toward a sewer grate. It skidded, just short of disaster. But Nathaniel Grant was already sprinting. He scooped it up mid-bounce, cradled it like gold, and dashed back toward the news crew. "Got it," he texted. "Uploading now." Elena took the drive, plugged it into her laptop, and began scanning its contents. What she found made her breath catch. Edward Langston's internal memos.emails warning staff to stall, delete, and obstruct Malcolm's transactions, littered the folders, time-stamped, signed, verifiable. One file bore the subject line, "Protecting our image read interference." Another, "He's not one of us. Delay him." But what sealed the storm was the security footage. Silent, clean, damning. Lillian deleting records, Edward shredding the account summary, Derek forging documentation. Clara's phone raised proudly as she jeered. Nathaniel's camera work was clinical, indisputable. Elena looked at Malcolm, nodded once, and uploaded the package to X with one line of text, "The evidence Sterling thought it could bury." The post detonated across the internet. 30 million views in 6 minutes. Finance pages shared it. Civil rights groups retweeted it. Fortune 100 CEOs commented anonymously under burner accounts. Screenshots of Edward's memo headlined by Clara's photo, the one she posted herself, spread like wildfire. The caption she'd added, "Sterling Bank upholds prestige," now looked like satire. Inside the bank, phones rang with fury, clients demanded explanations, investors began pulling capital. Sterling stock dropped 20% by the time Malcolm received Regina's next message. Victor confirmed. Elena uploaded, "Acquiring partners are ready." Malcolm replied, "Seal it." In the background, the news crew began live coverage. Sources say the man ejected is none other than Malcolm Reed, billionaire chairman of Peak Pulse Holdings. The anchor announced, "If that's confirmed, this could be one of the largest real-time corporate exposures in recent banking history." Malcolm stood calmly under the late morning sun, the chaos behind him building like a pressure cooker ready to explode. He took a quiet breath. Then he said softly, "More to the building than the cameras. You built a vault to keep people like me out. But I built a system to buy the vault itself. Inside. Edward, Lillian, and Clara stood in a silent boardroom, faces bathed in the flickering light of a sinking stock ticker. This time, they weren't looking down on anyone. They were watching their own fall begin. And as Malcolm's calm presence outside contrasted with their unraveling grip on power, a simple truth came into focus: the reckoning wasn't coming. It had arrived. The silence inside Sterling Bank's Manhattan headquarters was the kind that follows disaster, not before it. On the 33rd floor, behind frosted glass and a mahogany door that once symbolized impenetrable wealth, CEO Arthur Crane stood frozen as his executive assistant whispered, "Sir, we've lost $1 billion in valuation in the last 42 minutes. His hand hovered above the antique desk phone like it might bite him. On the wall behind him, the Sterling emblem, etched in gold, seemed to glint with irony. "Who is Malcolm Reed?" Arthur demanded, voice hoarse. "Why is this happening, Edward Langston?" now summoned from the branch and visibly sweating through his once crisp collar. Tried to speak. He provoked it. He baited us. He baited nothing. Lillian Baxter interrupted from the far end of the room, clutching a shattered iPad. "Your memo, Edward, your slander. You called him a fraud in writing." "We all saw it." Clara Wentworth, arms crossed, leaned against the wall with her face pale and tight. This wasn't supposed to happen. He's just some tech guy. Arthur turned to her sharply. That tech guy just cost us more goodwill than this bank has earned in a decade. Around the table, board members murmured and shifted, eyes glued to phones flashing real-time headlines, #Sterling exposed hits ATM views in under an hour. Malcolm Reed trending with civil rights leaders, fintech CEOs, Sterling Bank under fire for racial profiling, stock in free fall. Arthur clutched his temple. Do we sue him? Edward asked. Desperate. Defamation, misuse of recordings. He didn't doctor anything. Lillian snapped. We're the ones who lied. Clara leaned forward. We spin it. We issue a statement. Blame unauthorized conduct. We throw someone under the bus. That's you, Arthur said flatly. All of you. The room fell back into silence. Then the intercom crackled. Sir, the assistant whispered. We have a visitor. A Regina Cole. She says she represents Mr. Reed. Arthur's blood ran cold. She's here, just outside the boardroom. She has documents. Arthur looked up. Let her in. The door opened, and Regina entered like she'd owned the floor her whole life. She wore a midnight blue blazer, tablet in hand, calm as a morning tide. Good afternoon, she said. I have a message from Mr. Reed. She placed a thick leather folder on the table, each tab marked with legal seals. Peak Pulse has just executed a silent stock acquisition of Sterling's outstanding shares. We now hold controlling interest in this bank. For a moment, no one breathed. Then Edward choked. What Regina flipped open the folder. As of 10:54 a.m., Peak Pulse controls 52% of Sterling's voting stock. You may verify with the SEC filings time-stamped and filed by my team. Sterling Bank is no longer independent. Lillian stepped back. This is a takeover. Arthur's voice dropped. This is hostile. It was avoidable. Regina replied. He came here for a withdrawal. Clara's face drained of color. He bought the bank. Because of this, Regina met her gaze. No, he bought it in spite of this. But your actions gave him the moral high ground to do it in daylight. At that exact moment, Arthur's phone buzzed again. A breaking news alert flashed. Malcolm Reed acquires Sterling Bank after racial profiling incident, calls for sweeping reform. The press outside had already run with it. Cameras were trained on the building. Inside, Sterling's leaders were caught in a nightmare that was very real and irreversible. Arthur turned slowly toward the window, watching as a crowd gathered on Fifth Avenue, cheering, holding signs that read, We are not frauds. Banking belongs to everyone. Malcolm Reed. Justice delivered. Then the message came. Regina's phone buzzed. She read it, nodded, and looked up. Mr. Reed requests your attendance for a formal transition meeting in 7 minutes. I suggest you be there. Arthur swallowed hard. Where downstairs? Regina said. In your own conference hall. Edward, stunned, slumped into his chair. He really did it. He whispered, He owns this place. Clara sat down, legs wobbling beneath her. He made it look so easy. Regina paused at the doorway, turned back, and added, This isn't about revenge. It's about responsibility. Mr. Reed prefers change over chaos. You should, too. She walked out, heels tapping like a gavel down the hall, and as the boardroom door closed behind her, the once untouchable leaders of Sterling sat in disbelief, no longer shielded by power, but exposed by their prejudice. They had tried to erase a man, but now, that man held the pen, and he was rewriting everything. The conference hall that once hosted shareholder meetings and executive briefings now held silence so thick it felt judicial. Arthur Crane sat at the head of the long, polished oak table, flanked by Edward Langston, Lillian Baxter, and Clara Wentworth, all stripped of their earlier smugness, faces tight and pale under the recessed lighting. Dozens of Sterling's senior staff stood along the walls, forced witnesses to the reckoning. The room's digital display flickered with Malcolm Reed's name next to the Peak Pulse Holdings insignia, and a countdown timer in the corner ticked its final seconds before the scheduled press conference. Then the doors opened, and Malcolm walked in, measured, calm. Dressed in the same charcoal suit they once said didn't belong, at his side was Regina Cole, expression composed, tablet in hand. No one stood to greet them. Arthur finally broke the silence. "Mr. Reed, what is it you want from us?" Malcolm didn't sit. He looked across the room as if surveying a crime scene, then said, "I came in for a withdrawal. What I got was slander, obstruction, public humiliation, and silence from a leadership team that condoned it." Edward rose, trying to hold on to a thread of authority. "This is outrageous. You bought shares. Fine. But this bank now answers to Peak Pulse." Regina interrupted. "And to Mr. Reed." Malcolm turned slightly toward Arthur. "You've lost your shield of denial. The public has the footage. The investors have the proof. The regulators have the memos. What's left is accountability." Clara scoffed, still trying to weaponize poise. "So what? You want us to grovel?" Malcolm replied, "I want you removed." He nodded to Regina, who tapped her screen. The main display lit up with a montage of Edward's emails slandering Malcolm, ordering record deletions, suggesting that certain types of clients create PR risk. Then came Lillian's message labeling Malcolm a fraud, followed by the footage of her erasing his account from the system. Finally, Clara's live stream, voice dripping with elitism. "Sterling doesn't entertain imposters." Gasps echoed around the room. Arthur looked like a man watching his legacy shatter in real time. "This is damning," someone whispered from the back. "Unforgivable." Malcolm raised his hand, silencing the murmurs. "Effective immediately," he said. "Edward Langston is terminated. Derek Holt is terminated. Lillian Baxter is terminated. Clara Wentworth is banned from all Sterling Bank properties and services indefinitely." Edward stood, red-faced. "You can't do this. I've given this bank 22 years. And in 22 minutes, Malcolm said coldly. You unraveled its credibility. Lillian's mouth opened, then closed. She turned to Arthur. "Do something." Arthur didn't move. "I can't." "He owns us now." Clara grabbed her handbag, shaking. "You'll regret this. You think you've won, but money doesn't change your place." Malcolm looked at her, not with anger, but with something quieter and sharper. "You're right. Money doesn't change who I am, but it has a way of revealing exactly who you are." She stormed out. Edward followed, but not before snapping. "You think this will fix anything? You'll burn with the rest of us." Malcolm didn't respond. He turned instead to Arthur. "Now that the rot is out, we rebuild, and not alone." He raised a hand, and from the side entrance entered James Vaughn, a sharp-suited federal regulator with a stone face and a badge clipped to his coat. A low gasp rippled through the room. "What is this?" Arthur asked, voice brittle. "Oversight," Malcolm replied. "James Vaughn is with the Office of Financial Integrity. He's been watching Sterling for months. Today gave him what he needed." Vaughn stepped forward. "Sterling Bank is now under immediate review for discriminatory practices, obstruction of records, and compliance violations. The SEC and DOJ are being briefed." "This is a show," Lillian blurted. Vaughn ignored her. "You will sign Mr. Reed's reform charter or risk full charter revocation within 24 hours. Arthur glanced at the document. Regina had printed a sweeping set of reforms titled The Fair Vault Directive, Mandatory Anti-Bias Training. transparent audit trails, whistleblower protections, and a new public accountability board. Sign it, Vaughn said again, or we seize the institution. The cameras in the back blinked red. The press conference was now live. Arthur picked up the pen. His hand trembled. He signed. So did the remaining board members. Vaughn took the documents, nodded once, and exited. Malcolm turned back to the staff. This is not vengeance. This is correction. You built walls to keep people like me out. I bought the foundation and opened the gates. He paused, letting it settle. I'm not here to be the exception. I'm here to ensure there are no more exclusions. As the reporters flooded in, capturing the moment, the staff broke into spontaneous applause, not loud, not showy, just enough to acknowledge that something rare had happened in that room. A man had walked in accused and left in charge. Justice didn't shout. It walked in calm, spoke plainly, and rewrote the rules. In the weeks that followed Malcolm Reed's takeover, Sterling Bank transformed from a cautionary tale into the epicenter of financial reform. Gone were the exclusionary portraits on the marble walls, replaced with a rotating display of client stories from every background. Farmers, entrepreneurs, teachers, veterans, all treated with dignity. Malcolm didn't sit in a corner office. He walked the floors, met with staff, and listened. Then he launched FairVault, a sweeping internal overhaul that stunned the industry. Every employee, from security guards to senior executives, underwent mandatory anti-bias training crafted by behavioral economists and civil rights historians. Audit trails were made public. Complaint investigations were now handled by an independent review board, and whistleblowers were not only protected but encouraged. Weekly equity reports were published online, detailing demographics in service, loan approvals, and hiring. At first, Wall Street scoffed, but then something unexpected happened. Clients returned, not just out of curiosity, but loyalty. I moved my accounts to Sterling because it finally felt like a bank that wanted people like me. One client posted on X. The message went viral. More followed. Elena Torres, now appointed Sterling's head of public relations, launched a documentary-style campaign called The Open Ledger, revealing before and after testimonies. Regulators praised the bank's transparency. Meanwhile, Malcolm kept moving. In a keynote speech at the Global Finance Summit, he unveiled a national initiative, Bank Equal, a voluntary, then widely adopted certification program that challenged every major bank in the country to meet the same FairVault standards or risk public divestment campaigns. We're not mandating morality, Malcolm said from the stage. We're just making it measurable. Within 90 days, 8 of the nation's top 10 banks signed on. Fearing backlash and eager for credibility, Bank Equal became the most talked-about movement in finance since the 2008 collapse. Behind the scenes, Malcolm coordinated with regulators, activists, and fintech startups to build compliance tools that could scan for bias in real time. Financial institutions that once dismissed him were now asking for consultation. Clara Wentworth's former quote, "He doesn't belong here," had been etched onto a plaque in Sterling's headquarters. Right beneath it were the words, "But here he stands." Lillian's name disappeared from internal systems, while Derek Holt quietly applied to smaller firms and was rejected publicly when clients recognized his role in the scandal. Edward Langston, whose emails had ignited the fire, retreated from public life entirely. His LinkedIn now scrubbed clean but constantly targeted by watchdog groups reminding the world of what he tried to erase. Sterling, under Malcolm's leadership, became not only solvent, but respected, and with Bank Equal now influencing federal policy. A subtle shift rippled through an industry long untouched by scrutiny. Malcolm never gloated. He rarely even spoke of the day it all changed. But one morning, walking past the same VIP desk where Edward once sneered, He paused to help a young teller explain a financial form to an elderly Latino client. No cameras, no statement, just a quiet reminder that power, when reclaimed with purpose, doesn't shout. It rebuilds. The downfall came quietly for those who once stood atop Sterling's hierarchy. But its weight was permanent. Edward Langston's career, once padded with board seats and insider access, evaporated. After multiple failed attempts to re-enter the financial sector, he disappeared from public view. His name now a cautionary tale in ethics seminars. Lillian Baxter tried to pivot to consulting, but clients, especially those focused on diversity, refused her calls. Her leaked email branding Malcolm as a liability to the brand had become a case study in internalized bias. Her once impeccable reputation reduced to footnotes. Clara Wentworth, once the picture of elite banking elegance, faced social exile from the very circles she clung to. Her live stream mocking Malcolm became the signature visual in dozens of documentaries about modern systemic discrimination. Her family's estate firm quietly dropped her as a public spokesperson. Derek Holt, once smirking behind his teller window, bounced between short-term jobs and gig work. His attempts to claim he was just following orders were shredded by footage that showed him relishing in cruelty. But Malcolm Reed had no interest in revenge. Instead, he focused on redemption for those who wanted it. He launched Open Vault, a reform program inside Sterling dedicated to rehabilitating those involved in discriminatory practices through education, service, and accountability. Derek, unexpectedly, applied. He was accepted, but not into leadership. He spent a year assisting underbanked communities, silently unlearning the arrogance he once wielded. Malcolm never addressed him directly, but he saw the work. And that was enough. As Sterling's reputation soared, so did its influence. With FairVault embedded in its structure and BankEqual reshaping national standards, Malcolm announced one final initiative: Wealth Justice. Funded entirely by Peak Pulse and Sterling profits, Wealth Justice offered financial education, no-fee startup accounts, and legal defense funding for individuals facing banking discrimination. In its first 6 months, it reached over 2 million Americans. Single mothers denied loans, immigrants locked out by language barriers, formerly incarcerated entrepreneurs denied access. Malcolm didn't just change Sterling, he changed the rules of who got to build wealth in America. And still, he remained out of the spotlight. When asked why he never granted interviews about that day at the bank, he simply replied, "The work speaks louder than the wound." His assistant, Regina Cole, was often the one to deliver his messages. Now serving as Sterling's executive director of ethics and inclusion, Sonia Blake continued her own advocacy through digital media. Often citing the Sterling shift as a new chapter in corporate responsibility, Victor Hayes became a full partner at his fund, credited with one of the boldest and most principled public responses in a viral age. Elena Torres, now an author and documentary producer, told the story everywhere from Harvard to community banks in Tulsa. But perhaps the most powerful impact remained unseen. Older black businessmen who watched Malcolm's story unfold and remembered how they were once turned away for asking too many questions. Young students who studied finance not just to get in the room, but to lead it differently. Clerks, tellers, assistants who once watched injustice in silence and now knew what it looked like to challenge it. And for every client that walked through Sterling's doors, every woman in hijab, every man with an accent, every youth in sneakers and ambition, the air had changed. This time, no one asked if they belonged. They were greeted, served, respected, because someone had once stood in that lobby, denied a withdrawal, and decided instead to withdraw the rot. Justice prevails when truth is louder than power. The final line of Sterling's annual report read, "And when silence is broken by the right voice." So where have you seen unfairness? At a counter, in a boardroom, on a form that questioned your worth? Share your story in the comments. If Malcolm's journey reminds you that dignity is worth fighting for, subscribe. Tomorrow, we'll bring you another story of a person who didn't just push back, but rewrote the rules.